we are in the concert hall of the Sydney Opera House. It's an amazing space, isn't it? The Sydney Opera House is an architectural masterpiece and a modern cultural icon. UNESCO listed it as a World Heritage Site in 2007. Building the Opera House was pretty controversial. The government built it, funded by a state lottery, but they modified the designs of Danish architect Jørn Utzon. The 15-year saga of its design and construction is captured through photographs, parliamentary inquiries, correspondence, committee meetings, and financial accounts, all held in our state archive. State Records New South Wales holds boxes of paper records relating to the Sydney Opera House. They had many of the historical documents that supported the World Heritage nomination. They have drawers of architectural plans, including the original competition drawings by Jørn Utzon. They even have the guest list from the official opening ceremony in 1973, when Queen Elizabeth II cut the ribbon 40 years ago. But what if our opera house was being built today? Well, the architectural plans, the correspondence, and all the publicity, it would all be in electronic format. It would be what our archivists call born digital records. Information that was originally created in an electronic format. Now, these digital records of our 21st century opera house could form part of the state's archive, just like the paper records of the Sydney Opera House. So, can we preserve them? We've been pretty lucky up till now. Paper has inherent preservation qualities. Put it on a file, protect it from fire, mice, and the occasional shredder, and chances are it will be there for us in the future. Digital records, on the other hand, are fragile, and we need to be proactive in our management and archiving. Do you remember this? In the mid-1990s, I wrote my PhD history thesis on a Macintosh PowerBook, and I backed it up on a stack of these. My thesis is a series of born digital records, and it's been a real struggle for me to keep transferring my research files as software and hardware gets updated. I'm sure you've all had a similar experience. So for me as a historian, there's actually a niggling question in the back of my mind. Do we actually have the strategies in place to capture our born digital records for the archive and future-proof the memory of the world? The sobering answer is no. Today's born digital records are a critical risk. There's a digital records black hole looming over us, and it's getting larger every day. Now, we need these records to make informed decisions, to plan for the future, and to keep governments accountable. And of course, today's records are tomorrow's history. I'm already experiencing the effects of this digital records black hole. A few years ago, I wrote a planning history of the City Recital Hall. And as part of my research, I wanted to create a list of all the performances there in the first 10 years. By looking at the users and the repertoire, I could examine the theory that this new venue in the city had fostered artistic development. So who was using the venue? Well, unfortunately, in the first 10 years of operation, the venue had changed computer booking systems at least once. And so there was no complete list of performances available. What I had encountered was data loss through system migration. I'm discovering that born digital records from just 10 years ago are much harder to access than paper records from 100 years ago. And I'm finding that some digital information is not even being treated as a record, and so it's just disappearing into the digital black hole. Let me give you an example. Social media is rapidly becoming a standard business tool, but there are critical issues with the persistence of information and our access to it. Just 1 year after the 2011 Egyptian revolution, nearly 11% of the social media content documenting the civilian uprising had already disappeared. Closer to home, a survey of New South Wales government departments last year revealed that 79% of departments were actively using social media, yet 60% weren't capturing any social media records, even though some of them were doing critical government business, such as providing advice, collaborating with external business partners, undertaking public consultation, even emergency management. History can only be told from the records that survive or are preserved. Archivists around the world have been working hard to persuade governments of the urgency of capturing their born digital records and preserving them for future access. Yet governments appear oblivious of their business and legislative requirements. They seem to complacently think that it'll be backed up there on the server, or these days, up there in the cloud. Now, that's okay for 6 months, that strategy, maybe even 2 years. But it won't pass muster in 10 or 20 years when we try to access the nation's digital memory. UNESCO recognises the preservation and access of digital information as a global challenge. Rapidly changing technology heightens the stakes as it reduces access and creates redundancy. So, what can we do about this? Well, we all have to take a bit of personal responsibility. We need to delete, back up, and we all need to look at our digital records, see what software we're using, and check if we're using open source and ubiquitous software to reduce redundancy. And we need to make sure that we are aware of where we're sharing and storing our records, what platforms we're using, to make sure we can continue to have access to it. Now that's a bit of digital housekeeping for you all, a little bit of take home for you. But there's something more important to do. We've got to hold governments to account and remind them of their responsibilities. They have to invest in and maintain well-funded digital archives for our born digital records. Now, the British Library has just announced that they're creating an archive for every British website, online newsletter, e-book and blog, so that they can preserve Britain's digital memory and make it accessible into the future. But closer to home, our state government has not even committed funding for the state's digital archive beyond June 2013. That's just 1 month away. Can you believe that? There is no ongoing budget for the state's digital archive to ensure that born digital government records in our state are kept safe and can be made available to us all in the future. Funding the digital archive costs just $1 million a year. Now, a few months ago, Premier Barry O'Farrell unveiled a statue in Hyde Park to Governor Lachlan Macquarie. We know a lot about Macquarie. He was an influential colonial statesman. And why do we know so much? Well, because of the paper records in our archives. But what about the records of our 21st century statesmen? Well, in the current state of play, historians can't even access through the State Archive the Twitter feed of our first tweeting Premier, Nathan Rees. And if we don't have a funded digital archive, there won't be any records surviving of the government of Premier O'Farrell, which is kind of ironic since the Premier studied history at university. We need to future-proof the memory of the world. And our state government is actually in breach of its own legislation to preserve and make accessible the government records. Even more astounding, it's flouting its obligations under the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It is everyone's right to seek, receive and impart information and ideas, including in digital format. We have to make an effort to protect our rights and future-proof the memory of the world. Thank you.